The dust settled on her father's grave, and Fiona Darrow realized she was utterly alone in a world that cared nothing for a woman's pain. She stood there in the Montana heat of July 1878, her black dress clinging to her skin, watching the last of the ranch hands ride away without so much as a backward glance. Her father had built something here outside Utica, Montana, carved a life from the harsh land with his bare hands, and now these men acted as though his death released them from any obligation to his daughter. She was 22 years old, and for the first time in her life, she understood that sentiment and loyalty meant nothing when there was no one left to enforce them. The ranch house felt cavernous that first night. Fiona walked through rooms that still smelled of her father's pipe tobacco, touching things that had been his, feeling the weight of ownership pressing down on her shoulders. The ranch spread across 300 acres of Montana grassland, with cattle that needed tending, fences that needed mending, and a business that required constant vigilance. Her father had taught her plenty over the years, insisted she learn the books and the brands, but he had always been there beside her, his presence the real authority. Now she stood alone. The neighboring ranchers came calling within the week, their offers of help laced with condescension and poorly disguised greed. They wanted her land, wanted to absorb her cattle into their own herds, wanted to pat her hand and tell her that a woman had no business trying to run a ranch alone. Martin Eckhart was the worst of them, a thick-necked man with cold eyes who had coveted her father's water rights for years. "Your father was a good man, Miss Darrow," Eckhart said, standing in her parlor with his hat in his hands. "He would want to know you were taken care of. I am prepared to make you a generous offer for the property." "The property is not for sale," Fiona said, keeping her voice level despite the anger building in her chest. "Now, be reasonable," Eckhart continued, his tone taking on an edge. "You cannot possibly manage this place on your own. You have no hands, no foreman, no husband to help shoulder the burden. Sell while you still have something worth selling." Fiona stood, drawing herself to her full height. She was tall for a woman, with dark hair and eyes the color of storm clouds. Her father had always said she had her mother's beauty and his stubbornness, a combination that made her formidable when she chose to be. "I said the property is not for sale, Mr. Eckhart. I will thank you to respect my decision and leave my home." Eckhart's face reddened. "You will regret this foolishness, girl. This land will break you, and when it does, my offer will not stand." He left, slamming the door behind him, and Fiona allowed herself to sink back into her chair. Her hands were shaking. She clasped them together in her lap, willing herself to remain calm. She had meant every word. She would not sell. This was her father's legacy, her home, the only thing in the world that was truly hers. But Eckhart was right about one thing. She could not run the ranch alone. The next morning, Fiona rode into Utica. The town was small, a collection of wooden buildings clustered around a main street that turned to mud when it rained. She headed straight for the general store, where advertisements were posted on a board outside. She wrote out a notice herself, her handwriting clear and bold. "Ranch hand needed. Hard work, fair wages. Inquire at the Darrow Ranch." The storekeeper, a kindly man named Thompson, read the notice and frowned. "Miss Darrow, you sure about this? Advertising for hands might bring you all sorts. Could be drifters, troublemakers. Your father always hired men he knew." "My father is dead, Mr. Thompson," Fiona said quietly. "I must do what I can with what I have." She posted the notice and returned home, trying not to think about what kind of men might answer her call. The ranch felt emptier than ever as she went about the work alone, feeding the horses, checking the cattle in the nearest pasture, hauling water. The tasks were endless and exhausting. By sunset, Her body ached, but she forced herself to continue. She would not let this place fall apart. She would not prove the doubters right. 3 days passed with no response to her advertisement. Fiona began to wonder if anyone would come at all. Then, on the 4th day, she was in the barn mucking out stalls when she heard the sound of a horse approaching. She straightened, pushing her hair back from her face, and walked out into the bright afternoon sun. A man sat astride a bay gelding, his silhouette dark against the sky. As her eyes adjusted, she took in the details. He was tall, lean, with shoulders that spoke of strength earned through hard labor. He wore typical cowboy attire, dusty from travel, and a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed his face. As he dismounted, she saw that he was perhaps 26 or 27, with sun-browned skin and eyes the color of whiskey. "I am here about the job," he said, his voice low and steady. "Name is Fletcher Xavier." Fiona wiped her hands on her work dress, suddenly aware of how she must look, dirty and disheveled from her labor. "Fiona Darrow, this is my ranch." Fletcher looked around, taking in the property with an assessing gaze. "Good land. Lot of work for one person." "That is why I am hiring," Fiona said, lifting her chin. "I need someone who knows cattle, who can mend fences, handle a horse. The work is hard and the days are long." "I have been working cattle since I was old enough to sit a horse," Fletcher said. "Spent the last 5 years on a ranch down in Wyoming. Foreman can vouch for me if you want to send a telegram." "Why did you leave?" Fletcher's expression remained neutral, but something flickered in his eyes. "Owner sold the property. New owner brought his own men. I have been traveling, looking for the right place to settle." Fiona studied him, trying to gauge his character from his face. He met her gaze steadily, without the mockery or dismissal she had grown accustomed to from other men. There was something direct and honest in the way he looked at her, as though he saw her as a person rather than a problem to be solved or an obstacle to be overcome. "The pay is $30 a month, plus room and board," she said. "There is a bunkhouse, though it will be just you for now. Meals are in the main house. You work from sunup to sundown and you take orders from me. If you cannot abide taking direction from a woman, you should ride on now." Fletcher's mouth quirked slightly. "I can take direction from anyone who knows what they are talking about. Do you?" It was a fair question, and Fiona appreciated that he asked it straight. "My father taught me this business from the time I could walk. I know every inch of this land, every head of cattle. I know which pastures to rotate and when, how to read the weather, how to keep the books. What I do not have is the physical strength to do all the work myself. That is what I need you for." Fletcher nodded slowly. "Fair enough. I will take the job, Miss Darrow. You will not regret it." "We shall see," Fiona said, though she felt a flutter of relief in her chest. "Come, I will show you the bunkhouse." She led him across the yard to the long, low building that had once housed 6 ranch hands. Now it stood empty, the bunks stripped, the air stale. Fletcher walked through, testing the stove, checking the roof for leaks. "It will do fine," he said. "Better than a bedroll under the stars." "Supper is at 6, Fiona told him. "I will expect you at the house. We can discuss the work then." She left him to settle in and return to her own tasks, trying to ignore the way her heart had lightened at having someone else on the property. She told herself it was simply relief at having help, nothing more. She barely knew this man. For all she knew, he could be gone by morning, her trust misplaced yet again. But when 6 o'clock came, Fletcher appeared at the kitchen door, hat in hand, cleaned up and ready for supper. Fiona had made a simple meal of beans and cornbread, with coffee that was perhaps too strong. They sat at the kitchen table, and she found herself studying him in the lamplight. His face was weathered but kind, with lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled often, though he was serious now. "Tell me about the ranch," Fletcher said, breaking the silence. "How many head of cattle? What are your plans for the winter?" They talked business, and Fiona felt herself relaxing as she realized he truly did know his work. He asked intelligent questions, offered sensible suggestions, and listened when she explained her father's methods. It was the first real conversation she had had since her father's death, the first time someone treated her as a partner in the enterprise rather than a burden to be managed. "Your father taught you well," Fletcher said as they finished their meal. "It is clear you love this place." "It is all I have," Fiona said, then wished she had not. The words sounded too vulnerable, too exposed. Fletcher's eyes met hers across the table. "Sometimes what we have is enough." The next morning, they began the real work. Fiona woke before dawn, as was her habit, and found Fletcher already in the barn, tending to the horses. They worked side by side, falling into a rhythm that surprised them both. Fletcher was true to his word, taking direction without complaint, but also offering his own expertise when it was needed. He was strong where she was not, able to lift heavy gates and haul supplies that would have taken her twice as long. But he also respected her knowledge, asking her opinion on decisions large and small. The days fell into a pattern. They rode out together to check the herds, mended fences that had fallen into disrepair, and worked on reinforcing the barn before winter came. In the evenings, they ate supper together, and slowly, carefully, they began to know each other. Fiona learned that Fletcher had grown up in Texas, the son of a rancher who had lost everything in a drought. He had been working other people's land since he was 16, saving what he could, dreaming of having his own place someday. He was quiet but not cold, thoughtful but not distant. He had a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard sometimes, making her laugh when she least expected it. Fletcher learned that Fiona was fiercer than she appeared, that beneath her proper manners and careful control was a will of iron. She had loved her father deeply, and his death had left a wound that was slow to heal. She was lonely, though she would never admit it, and she was terrified of losing the ranch, though she hid that fear behind determination. A week passed, then two. The work was endless but satisfying, and Fiona found herself looking forward to the mornings, to the sound of Fletcher's voice calling a greeting as she stepped out of the house. She told herself it was simply nice to have company, to have help. She ignored the way her pulse quickened when he smiled at her, the way she found excuses to work near him. One evening, as they sat on the porch after supper watching the sun set over the mountains, Fletcher said, "You have good instincts for this work. Your father would be proud." Fiona felt her throat tighten. "I hope so. I worry sometimes that I am making a mess of things, that I will lose everything he built." "You are not losing anything," Fletcher said firmly. "This place is thriving because of you. You should give yourself more credit." "It is easier with help," Fiona admitted. "I do not know what I would have done if you had not come along." Fletcher was quiet for a moment, then said, "I am glad I found this place. It feels like the right spot to settle." Something in his tone made Fiona look at him. In the fading light, his expression was open, unguarded. For a moment she thought he might say something more, but then he stood, stretching. "I should turn in. Early start tomorrow." "Yes, of course," Fiona said, feeling oddly disappointed. "Good night, Fletcher." "Good night, Miss Darrow." She watched him walk across the yard to the bunkhouse, his figure fading into the dusk. When she finally went inside, she found she could not stop thinking about the way he had looked at her, the warmth in his voice when he spoke of settling here. She told herself she was being foolish, reading too much into simple kindness. Fletcher was her employee, nothing more. It would be a mistake to think otherwise, but the truth was harder to ignore with each passing day. She was drawn to him in a way that frightened her, that made her feel vulnerable at a time when she could afford no weakness. She had built walls around her heart after her father's death, determined to need no one, to rely only on herself. Fletcher was threatening those walls simply by being himself. Steady, reliable, kind. The third week brought trouble. Fiona rode out to check on the northern pasture and found several head of cattle missing. The fence had been cut deliberately, the wire snipped clean. Her heart sank as she examined the damage. This was no accident. Fletcher came up beside her, his face grim. "Rustlers. Eckhart," Fiona said, anger heating her voice. "He warned me this would happen. He is trying to force me to sell. Can you prove it?" "No, but I know it was him." She looked at the ruined fence, calculating the loss. "I cannot afford to lose more cattle. We need to watch the herds more closely." "I can sleep out here, keep an eye on things," Fletcher offered. "It is too much for one person. We will have to take turns." They spent the next several nights taking watches, one of them always awake and alert while the other rested. It was exhausting work on top of their daily labor, and Fiona felt the strain pulling at her. But she refused to give in, refused to let Eckhart win. On the fourth night of their watch, Fiona was sitting by a small fire in the northern pasture when Fletcher rode up. She had not expected him. It was supposed to be her watch alone. "What are you doing here?" she asked as he dismounted. "Could not sleep," Fletcher said, settling beside her. "Figured you could use the company." They sat in companionable silence, listening to the night sounds, the cattle lowing softly, the wind moving through the grass, the crackle of the fire. Fiona felt her exhaustion weighing on her, making her shoulders sag. "You need to rest," Fletcher said quietly. "You are pushing yourself too hard." "I have no choice. This ranch will not run itself. You have me now. You can share the burden." Fiona looked at him, seeing the concern in his face. "I have learned not to rely on others. People leave. People die. The only person I can truly count on is myself." Fletcher was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was gentle but firm. "That is a lonely way to live." "It is a safe way to live," Fiona countered. "I need no one. I cannot afford to." Fletcher turned to face her fully, his eyes catching the firelight. "What if needing someone is not a weakness? What if it is just being human?" Fiona felt her defenses rising. "You do not understand. I have already lost everyone who mattered. I will not put myself through that again." "So you will just go through life alone, never letting anyone close, never trusting anyone?" "If that is what it takes, yes." Fletcher reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand. His palm was warm and calloused, solid and real. "I understand fear, Fiona. I understand loss. But closing yourself off from the world is not living. It is just surviving." Fiona looked down at their joined hands, feeling something crack in her chest. "I do not know how to do anything else. Not anymore." "Then let me help you learn." Fletcher's voice was soft, almost tender. "You do not have to face everything alone. I told you I need no one." Fletcher smiled then, a slow, warm smile that made her breath catch. "Then let me be your want." The words hung between them, simple and profound. Fiona felt tears prick her eyes, felt the walls she had built start to crumble. She wanted to pull away, to retreat into the safety of her isolation, but she was so tired of being alone, so tired of carrying everything by herself. "I am afraid," she whispered. "I know," Fletcher said. "But I am not going anywhere. I am here, Fiona. Let me be here for you." She looked up at him, seeing the sincerity in his face, the steadiness that had drawn her to him from the first. Slowly, tentatively, she let herself lean against him, let him put his arm around her shoulders. It felt like coming home after a long, exhausting journey. They sat like that for a long time, watching the fire burn down to embers. Fiona felt something shift inside her, felt the possibility of trust beginning to take root. It was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. When Fletcher finally spoke again, his voice was low. I've been alone most of my life, moving from place to place, never staying long enough to put down roots. I told myself it was better that way, simpler. But the truth is, I was just afraid of wanting something and losing it. What changed? Fiona asked. I came here. I met you. He paused, then added, I am tired of running, Fiona. I want to stay. I want to build something that matters, and I want to do it with you if you will let me. Fiona turned to look at him, her heart pounding. Fletcher, you do not have to say anything now, he interrupted gently. I just needed you to know. You are not alone anymore, not if you do not want to be. They stayed out in the pasture until dawn broke over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. When they finally rode back to the ranch house, something between them had changed. The air felt charged with possibility, with the fragile beginning of something new. Over the following weeks, their relationship deepened. It was not a sudden transformation, but a gradual opening, like a flower unfurling in the sun. Fletcher courted her in small ways, bringing her wildflowers he found on his rides, insisting she rest while he took on the heavier work, sitting with her in the evenings and talking about everything and nothing. Fiona found herself softening, allowing him past her defenses bit by bit. They worked together during the day, and their partnership grew stronger. Fletcher proved himself invaluable, not just in his labor but in his judgment. When problems arose, they solved them together. When decisions needed to be made, he asked for her opinion and listened to her answers. He treated her as an equal, something Fiona had never experienced with any man other than her father. The trouble with Eckhart continued. More fences were cut, more cattle went missing. Fiona reported the thefts to the sheriff in Utica, but the lawman was old and disinclined to challenge a wealthy rancher like Eckhart without solid proof. Frustration ate at Fiona, but Fletcher helped her channel that frustration into action. They reinforced their fences, kept closer watch on the herds, and made it clear they would not be intimidated. One afternoon, Eckhart himself rode onto the property. Fiona and Fletcher were working in the corral when he arrived, flanked by two of his men. Fletcher moved to stand beside Fiona, his presence a quiet reassurance. Miss Darrow, Eckhart said, not bothering to dismount. I heard you have been having troubles. Cattle gone missing, fences damaged. This is what happens when a woman tries to run a ranch without proper protection. My cattle would be fine if you would keep your hands off them, Fiona said coldly. Eckhart's eyes narrowed. That is a serious accusation. You have proof. I know it is you. Knowing and proving are two different things. Eckhart's gaze shifted to Fletcher. You must be the drifter she hired. Word of advice, friend. This place is doomed. Better to move on before you go down with it. Fletcher's expression did not change. I am not going anywhere, and neither is Miss Darrow. You are making a mistake, Eckhart said. Both of you. That is not your concern, Fiona said. Now get off my property. Eckhart stared at her for a long moment, then wheeled his horse around and rode off, his men following. Fiona watched him go, her hands clenched into fists. He is not going to stop, she said quietly. No, probably not, Fletcher agreed. But we will be ready for him. That night, they set a trap. Fletcher hid in the northern pasture while Fiona stayed near the house, both of them armed and alert. Just after midnight, they heard the sound of horses approaching. Fletcher watched from concealment as three men rode up to the fence line and began cutting the wire. He recognized them as Eckhart's hired hands. Fletcher fired a shot into the air, startling the men and their horses. Drop your tools and ride out, or the next shot will not be a warning. The men hesitated, looking at each other, then apparently decided it was not worth the risk. They mounted up and rode off into the darkness. Fletcher waited until he was sure they were gone, then rode back to find Fiona waiting anxiously. They were Eckhart's men, he told her. I did not shoot anyone, just scared them off. But now we have witnesses to the damage if we need them. Did you recognize which men? 3 of them. I could identify them if needed. Fiona felt a grim satisfaction. Good. Tomorrow we go to the sheriff. If he will not act on my word, maybe he will act on yours. The next morning they rode into Utica together. The sheriff listened to their story, his expression skeptical, but Fletcher's detailed description of the men and their actions seemed to carry weight. The lawman promised to look into it, though Fiona doubted he would do much. Still, the fact that they had confronted the situation openly might give Eckhart pause. As they left the sheriff's office, Fletcher touched her arm. "You handled that well." "I am tired of being pushed around," Fiona said. "This is my land, my life. I will not let anyone take it from me." "I know you will not," Fletcher smiled at her. "You are the strongest person I have ever met, Fiona." She felt warmth spread through her chest at his words. "I have help now. That makes all the difference." They stopped at the general store to pick up supplies, and as they were loading the wagon, a woman approached. She was perhaps 40, well-dressed, with kind eyes and a gentle smile. "Fiona Darrow?" she asked. "Yes, madam. I am Margaret Simmons. Your father was a good friend to my late husband. I heard about your troubles with Eckhart." She lowered her voice. "I want you to know that not everyone in this town supports him. There are several of us who think he has gotten too big for his britches. If you need witnesses or support, you come to me." Fiona felt a swell of gratitude. "Thank you, Mrs. Simmons. That means more than you know." The woman patted her hand. "Women need to stick together, especially in this rough country. You are doing a brave thing holding onto your father's ranch. Do not let the men tell you otherwise." As they rode back to the ranch, Fiona felt lighter than she had in weeks. "Maybe we are not as alone as I thought." "You were never alone," Fletcher said. "You just did not know who your friends were yet." That evening, as the sun set in a blaze of orange and purple, Fiona found Fletcher sitting on the porch. She settled beside him, comfortable in the silence between them. It was Fletcher who finally broke it. "I need to tell you something," he said, his voice serious. "I came here looking for work and I found it, but I found something else too, something I was not expecting." Fiona's heart began to beat faster. "What did you find?" Fletcher turned to face her, his eyes searching hers. "I found a reason to stay. I found you." "Fletcher, let me finish," he said gently. "I know this is complicated. I know you hired me to work for you, and there is a power difference there that I do not want to take advantage of. But I also cannot keep silent about how I feel. I have come to care for you, Fiona. Deeply." Fiona felt her breath catch. "I care for you too. I have for a while now. I was just too afraid to admit it." "You do not have to be afraid," Fletcher said. "Not with me." He reached up slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, and cupped her face in his hand. When she did not move, he leaned in and kissed her. It was gentle and sweet, a question more than a demand. Fiona answered by kissing him back, letting herself sink into the warmth and safety of his embrace. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathing hard. Fletcher rested his forehead against hers. "I meant what I said that night in the pasture. Let me be your want, Fiona. Let me stand beside you, not just as your hired hand, but as your partner in all things." "Yes," Fiona whispered. "Yes, I want that too." They sat together as darkness fell, holding each other, talking softly about the future. For the first time since her father's death, Fiona felt hope bloom in her chest. She was not alone anymore. She had someone who saw her as she truly was and loved her anyway. Someone who would stand with her through whatever came. The harassment from Eckhart diminished after their visit to the sheriff. Whether it was the public confrontation or the knowledge that they were prepared to defend themselves, Fiona did not know. But the cattle stopped disappearing, and the fences remained intact. They used the reprieve to strengthen the ranch. making repairs and improvements that had been neglected. As summer faded into autumn, the relationship between Fiona and Fletcher deepened. They were open about their feelings now, though they maintained propriety for the sake of Fiona's reputation. Fletcher still slept in the bunkhouse, but they spent every possible moment together, working side by side during the day and sitting together in the evenings. One crisp October morning, Fletcher came to the house with a determined expression. Fiona was preparing breakfast and looked up in surprise when he walked in without knocking, something he never did. "Fletcher, what is wrong?" "Nothing is wrong," he said, then seemed to struggle with his words. "Actually, there is something I need to say, something I have been thinking about for a while now." Fiona set down the spoon she was holding, her full attention on him. "All right." Fletcher took off his hat, turning it in his hands. "I love you, Fiona. I think I have loved you since that first night in the pasture when you told me you needed no one. It made me want to be the person you chose anyway, not out of need but out of want." Fiona felt tears sting her eyes. "I love you too." "Then marry me," Fletcher said simply. "Let me be your husband, your partner in truth. We can build this ranch together, build a life together. I do not have much to offer you except my labor and my loyalty, but I swear I will spend every day trying to make you happy." Fiona crossed the room and took his hands in hers. "You have already made me happier than I thought possible. Yes, Fletcher. Yes, I will marry you." He pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly, and she felt the last of her walls crumble. She had spent so long protecting herself, so long insisting she needed no one. But Fletcher had shown her that wanting someone, choosing someone, was not weakness. It was strength. They were married in November, a simple ceremony in the small church in Utica. Margaret Simmons stood as Fiona's witness, and several other townspeople attended, showing their support for the young couple. Even the skeptical sheriff showed up, which Fiona took as a good sign. Eckhart was notably absent, but she did not care. This was her day, her joy, and she would not let thoughts of him intrude. Fletcher looked handsome in his best suit, his hair neatly combed, his eyes full of love as he watched Fiona walk down the aisle. She wore a simple dress of cream-colored silk, the only extravagance she had allowed herself. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Fletcher kissed her with such tenderness that she thought her heart might burst. That night, Fletcher moved his things into the main house, into the room that was now theirs. They lay together in the big bed, talking quietly about their plans for the future. Fletcher wanted to expand the herd, build a new barn. Fiona wanted to improve the breeding stock, maybe even start raising horses. They dreamed together, building castles in the air that felt tantalizingly real. "I never thought I would have this," Fiona said softly. "A partner, a true marriage. I thought I would always be alone." "You will never be alone again," Fletcher promised. "I am here and I am not going anywhere." Winter came to Montana with brutal force. The snow piled high, and the temperatures dropped well below freezing. Fletcher and Fiona worked together to keep the cattle fed and the ranch operational, rising before dawn and working long after dark. It was exhausting, but they faced it as a team, supporting each other through the difficulties. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire, thawing out and resting their weary bodies. Fletcher would read aloud from whatever book they had on hand, or they would simply talk, sharing stories from their pasts, dreams for their future. Fiona learned more about Fletcher's childhood in Texas, about the drought that had destroyed his father's ranch and killed his parents' dreams. Fletcher learned about Fiona's mother, who had died when Fiona was 12, and how that loss had bonded father and daughter even more tightly. "My mother was from back east," Fiona told him one evening. "She never quite adjusted to life out here. My father said she was always a bit melancholy, always longing for the cities and society she had left behind." When she died, I think part of it was just giving up. She did not have the strength for this life. But you do, Fletcher said. I do not know about that. Sometimes I feel like I am barely holding on. You are stronger than you think, Fletcher insisted. Look at everything you have survived, everything you have accomplished. Your mother may have given up, but you never would. It is not in your nature. Fiona leaned against him, drawing comfort from his certainty. I am strong because I have you beside me. Before you came, I was drowning. I just did not want to admit it. We save each other, Fletcher said simply. That is what marriage is. The winter was hard, but they survived it together. When spring finally came, melting the snow and bringing life back to the land, Fiona and Fletcher began implementing their plans. They bought new breeding stock, expanded the pastures, and hired 2 additional ranch hands as the work increased. The ranch was thriving under their joint management, and word began to spread that the Fletcher Xavier Ranch was one of the best-run operations in the territory. Eckhart made one more attempt to cause trouble, spreading rumors that Fletcher had married Fiona for her property, that he was just a fortune hunter who would drain the ranch dry. But the people who knew them saw the truth, that theirs was a genuine partnership built on love and mutual respect. The rumors died quickly, and Eckhart seemed to accept defeat, turning his attention to other ventures. In June of 1879, nearly a year after Fletcher had first arrived at the ranch, Fiona discovered she was pregnant. She told Fletcher over breakfast one morning, watching his face carefully to gauge his reaction. For a moment he just stared at her, processing the news. Then a smile spread across his face, broad and joyful. "A baby," he said, his voice full of wonder. "A baby," Fiona confirmed, her own smile matching his. Fletcher came around the table and pulled her into his arms, holding her carefully as though she might break. "We are going to be parents. Are you happy?" Fiona asked, though she could see the answer in his face. "I am more than happy. I am blessed." He kissed her forehead, then her cheeks, then her lips. "You have given me everything I ever wanted, Fiona. A home, a purpose, a family. I love you so much." "I love you too," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I cannot believe how much my life has changed in just 1 year. I went from being alone and terrified to having all of this." "You deserve all of it," Fletcher said firmly. "Every bit of happiness, every bit of love. Do not ever doubt that." The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Fiona continued to work on the ranch, though Fletcher became increasingly protective, trying to convince her to rest more. She laughed at his hovering but appreciated the care behind it. Margaret Simmons visited regularly, offering advice and support, and other women from the town also reached out, creating a community around Fiona that she had not known she needed. In February of 1880, on a cold but clear day, Fiona gave birth to a healthy baby boy. The labor was long and difficult, but Fletcher stayed by her side through all of it, holding her hand and encouraging her. When the midwife finally placed the baby in Fiona's arms, she looked down at the tiny, perfect face and felt her heart expand in ways she had not known were possible. "He is beautiful," Fletcher said, his voice choked with emotion. "He looks just like you." "He has your eyes," Fiona said, tracing the baby's features with a gentle finger. They named him Samuel after Fiona's father. Fletcher held his son with such tenderness, such obvious love, that Fiona fell in love with him all over again. He was a devoted father from the first moment, rising in the night to help with the baby, singing him lullabies in his rough cowboy voice, cradling him for hours while Fiona rested. The ranch work continued, but their priorities had shifted. Samuel was the center of their world now, and they organized their days around his needs. Fiona found that motherhood came naturally to her, though it was exhausting in ways she had not anticipated. Fletcher was there through it all, sharing the burden, making her laugh when she was too tired to think straight. As Samuel grew, he became the joy of their lives. He was a happy baby, quick to smile, and as he got older, he showed signs of having both his mother's determination and his father's easy temperament. The ranch hands doted on him, and he became something of a mascot, toddling around the yard and helping with the chores. The years passed peacefully. The ranch prospered under Fletcher and Fiona's management, becoming one of the most successful operations in Montana. They added to their family as well. A daughter named Caroline was born in 1882, and another son, Robert, in 1884. Each child was loved and cherished, raised to understand the value of hard work and family loyalty. Fiona sometimes looked back on that dark time after her father's death when she had been so alone, so convinced she needed no one. It seemed like a different life, a different person. Fletcher had changed everything. He had shown her that vulnerability was not weakness, that accepting help was not failure, that love was worth the risk of loss. "You ever regret it?" she asked him one evening as they sat on the porch watching their children play in the yard. Samuel was 10 now, tall and sturdy, helping his younger siblings build a fort out of old crates. "Regret what?" Fletcher asked. "Staying here. Marrying me. You gave up your dream of having your own ranch." Fletcher looked at her in surprise. "This is my ranch, Fiona, ours. We built this together. I have everything I ever wanted. But legally the land is still in my name, from my father." "I do not care about names on a deed," Fletcher said. "This is our home, our family, our life. That is what matters to me. Besides, you know I never wanted to own something just to own it. I wanted a place to belong, a purpose, people to love. I have all of that right here." Fiona took his hand, squeezing it gently. "I am grateful every day that you answered my advertisement. I do not know what would have become of me if you had not." "You would have survived," Fletcher said confidently. "You are a survivor, Fiona, but I am glad you did not have to do it alone. So am I." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the mountains. The sky turned shades of pink and gold, painting everything in warm light. This was home, Fiona thought. This was everything. The children grew and the ranch continued to prosper. Samuel took to ranch life naturally, working alongside his father from a young age. Caroline was more interested in the business side of things, showing a sharp mind for numbers and negotiation that reminded Fiona of herself. Robert was still young, but he already showed signs of being a natural horseman. In 1890, when Samuel was 16 and preparing to take on more responsibility on the ranch, Fiona and Fletcher celebrated their 10th wedding anniversary. They threw a party at the ranch, inviting neighbors and friends from town. Margaret Simmons was there, older now but still kind and supportive. Even the sheriff, who had eventually become a friend, attended with his wife. As Fiona looked around at the gathered people, at her thriving children and successful ranch, she felt overwhelmed with gratitude. She found Fletcher in the crowd and caught his eye. He smiled at her, that warm, steady smile that still made her heart skip, and moved through the crowd to her side. "Are you all right?" he asked softly. "I am more than all right," Fiona said. "I am happy, truly, deeply happy." Fletcher wrapped his arm around her waist. "So am I. This has been the best 10 years of my life." "Mine too." Later, when the party had wound down and the children were in bed, Fletcher and Fiona stood outside under the stars. The night was clear and cool, with a breeze that carried the scent of grass and sage. "Do you remember that first night in the pasture?" Fiona asked. "When I told you I needed no one?" "I remember," Fletcher said. "You were so fierce, so determined to do everything yourself." "I was so afraid," Fiona admitted. "Afraid of needing someone, of being vulnerable. I thought independence meant isolation." "What do you think now?" Fiona turned to face him, reaching up to touch his face. "I think needing someone is not the same as being weak. I think choosing to let someone in, choosing to build a life together, is the bravest thing I have ever done." "You taught me that, Fletcher. You showed me that love is not a trap but a freedom." Fletcher pulled her close, kissing her with the passion and tenderness that had not dimmed over the years. "You taught me just as much. You taught me what it means to have a home, to belong somewhere. I spent so many years drifting, always moving on. But the moment I saw you in that barn, covered in dirt and defiant as hell, I knew I had found where I was meant to be." They held each other under the vast Montana sky, surrounded by the life they had built together. The ranch stretched out around them, solid and real, a testament to their hard work and love. Inside the house, their children slept safely, dreaming their own dreams. The years continued to pass, bringing their share of challenges and joys. There were hard winters and dry summers, years when the cattle prices were low and money was tight. There were illnesses and accidents, the inevitable struggles of life on a ranch. But Fletcher and Fiona faced it all together, their partnership never wavering. Samuel eventually married a girl from town, a sweet-natured young woman named Anna who loved the ranch as much as he did. They built a house on the property, near the main house but separate, and started their own family. Caroline went away to school for a while, getting an education that would serve her well when she eventually returned to help manage the business side of the ranch. Robert, as expected, became an expert horseman, gaining a reputation throughout Montana for his skill in training and breeding. Fletcher and Fiona grew older together, their hair turning gray, their faces lined with the marks of a life well lived. They were in their 50s when Samuel took over the day-to-day running of the ranch, allowing them to step back and enjoy a slower pace. But they never stopped working entirely. The ranch was too much a part of them for that. One evening in the summer of 1900, Fletcher and Fiona sat on the porch as they had done thousands of times before. They were watching their grandchildren play in the yard, the next generation of the family they had built. There were 5 grandchildren now, with another on the way, all of them healthy and happy. "We did well," Fletcher said softly. "We did," Fiona agreed. "Better than I ever imagined possible." "Do you ever think about what would have happened if I had not stopped here that day? If I had ridden past, looking for work somewhere else?" Fiona shuddered at the thought. "I try not to. I cannot imagine my life without you in it." "Me neither." Fletcher took her hand, his grip still strong despite the years. "You saved me, Fiona. I was so lost before I found you. I did not even realize it, but I was just going through the motions, not really living." "You saved me too," Fiona said. "I was drowning in grief and stubbornness, convinced I had to face everything alone. You showed me a better way." They sat in comfortable silence, hands clasped, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. The mountains stood eternal in the distance, and the land stretched out around them, rich and full of life. "I love you," Fletcher said, as he had said countless times over the years. "I love you too," Fiona replied, the words as true and vital as they had been the first time she spoke them. The years continued their steady march. Fletcher and Fiona aged gracefully, their love deepening with each passing season. They celebrated their 30th anniversary in 1909, surrounded by their children, their grandchildren, and even a great-grandchild, Samuel's first grandson. In 1912, on a mild spring day, Fletcher collapsed while working in the barn. Fiona heard Samuel's shout and ran faster than she had moved in years. She found her husband lying on the ground, Samuel cradling his head. Fletcher's face was pale, his breathing labored. "Get the doctor," Fiona ordered, her voice steady despite the terror coursing through her. She knelt beside Fletcher, taking his hand. "Hold on, just hold on." Fletcher's eyes found hers and he managed a weak smile. "I am all right, just got dizzy." But he was not all right. The doctor confirmed that Fletcher's heart was weak, damaged by decades of hard labor and simply by the passage of time. He prescribed rest and limited activity, which Fletcher chafed against but reluctantly accepted. For several months, Fletcher seemed to improve. He spent his days sitting on the porch or taking short walks around the property, always with Fiona by his side. They talked about their life together, remembering the early days, marveling at how far they had come. Fletcher made sure his affairs were in order, that Fiona and the children would be taken care of. One evening in late summer, as the sun set in a blaze of glory, Fletcher turned to Fiona and said, "I am ready." "Ready for what?" Fiona asked, though her heart already knew the answer. "Whatever comes next. I have lived a good life, Fiona, the best life. I have no regrets." "You cannot leave me," Fiona said, her voice breaking. "I need you." Fletcher smiled, touching her face with his weathered hand. "You do not need me, remember, you never did, but I hope you still want me." "Always," Fiona whispered. "Always." "Then I will be with you," Fletcher said. "Even when I am gone, I will be in every sunrise over these mountains, in every breath of wind across the grass. This ranch, this family, it is all us, Fiona. That does not end." He died peacefully that night in his sleep, with Fiona holding his hand. When she woke at dawn and realized he was gone, she felt as though her heart had been torn from her chest. The pain was unbearable, overwhelming, worse than anything she had ever experienced. But as the days passed and she began to navigate life without Fletcher beside her, Fiona found that his words had been true. He was still with her, in the land they had built together, in the children they had raised, in the love they had shared. His presence was woven into every aspect of her life, and while she missed him with an ache that never truly faded, she was not alone. Samuel and Anna moved into the main house to keep her company. Her children and grandchildren surrounded her with love and support. The ranch continued to operate, a living legacy to Fletcher's vision and their partnership. Fiona lived for another 8 years after Fletcher's death. She remained active in the ranch's management, her mind sharp even as her body grew frail. She told stories about Fletcher to her grandchildren and great-grandchildren, making sure they understood what kind of man he had been, what their love had meant. On a warm afternoon in June 1920, Fiona sat on the porch of the ranch house, watching the land she loved spread out before her. She was 84 years old, her life full and complete. As she sat there, she felt a peace settle over her, a sense of rightness and completion. She thought about that young woman she had been, standing over her father's grave, convinced she needed no one. She thought about the cowboy who had ridden into her life and changed everything. She thought about the words he had spoken to her that night in the pasture. "Then let me be your want." She had wanted him. She had chosen him. And in doing so, she had found not weakness but the greatest strength she had ever known. Fiona closed her eyes, feeling the warm sun on her face, hearing the familiar sounds of the ranch around her. When Samuel found her an hour later, she had passed peacefully, a slight smile on her lips. They buried her next to Fletcher, on a hill overlooking the ranch they had built together. The entire community came out for the funeral, paying their respects to a woman who had become a legend in her own time. She had been a pioneer, a businesswoman, a mother, and a wife. But more than any of that, she had been a woman who had learned that love was not a weakness, but the foundation of everything worthwhile. The ranch continued for generations after, passed down through the family. The Xavier name became synonymous with quality cattle and honest dealing throughout Montana. And on quiet evenings, when the wind blew across the grass and the sun set over the mountains, Some said you could still feel the presence of Fletcher and Fiona, watching over the land they had loved. The great-grandchildren and great-great-grandchildren grew up hearing stories about their remarkable ancestors. They heard about the grieving young woman who insisted she needed no one, and the gentle cowboy who had replied that he would be her want instead. They heard about the partnership that had been forged from that moment, about the love that had sustained two people through decades of challenges and triumphs. The ranch house still stood, maintained and cherished by each new generation. Inside, on the mantel, sat a photograph from Fletcher and Fiona's wedding day. In the picture, they stood side by side, their faces young and hopeful, their eyes full of love. It was a reminder to everyone who saw it that the greatest legacy was not the land or the cattle or the money, but the love that had made it all possible. The story of Fletcher and Fiona became a part of Montana folklore, told and retold around dinner tables and campfires. It was a story about resilience and partnership, about finding strength in vulnerability, about choosing love even when it felt risky. It was a story that reminded people that needing someone was not the same as weakness, and that sometimes the bravest thing you could do was open your heart to another person. In the dusty records of Utica, Montana, their names were recorded in ledgers and legal documents. Fletcher Xavier and Fiona Darrow Xavier, ranchers and pioneers. But to the family they left behind, they were so much more. They were proof that love could transform lives, that partnership could overcome any obstacle, and that the choice to let someone in was the most powerful choice of all. The land they had worked stretched across the Montana grasslands, still producing, still thriving. The cattle they had raised became the foundation of bloodlines that spread throughout the West. The children they had loved grew old themselves, passing the stories on to yet another generation. But perhaps the most enduring legacy was the lesson they had taught simply by living their lives together. That independence did not have to mean isolation. That asking for help was not surrender. That love, when freely chosen and fully embraced, could create something far greater than any individual could achieve alone. The sun continued to rise and set over the ranch, painting the sky in glorious colors. The wind continued to blow across the grass, carrying the scent of sage and the promise of rain. The cattle grazed peacefully, and the fences stood strong. And somewhere in all of it, woven into the very fabric of the place, was the enduring spirit of two people who had found each other when they needed it most, and who had built a life together that would echo through the generations. Their story was complete, their lives fully lived. From the moment Fletcher had ridden onto the property in response to a simple advertisement, to the peaceful ends of their long lives, they had been partners in every sense of the word. They had worked together, struggled together, laughed together, and loved together. They had raised a family and built an empire, not through dominance or force, but through cooperation and mutual respect. And it had all begun with a simple exchange on a dusty ranch in Montana, when a grieving woman had insisted she needed no one, and a wise cowboy had replied, "Then let me be your want." Those words had changed everything. They had opened the door to a love story that would span decades and impact generations. They had transformed two lonely souls into a partnership that became legendary. And they had proven, beyond any doubt, that the greatest strength comes not from standing alone, but from choosing to stand together. The ranch remained in the family, a testament to what Fletcher and Fiona had built. Each generation added their own touches, modernized where necessary, but always maintained the core values that had been established by the founders: hard work, integrity, family, and above all, the understanding that we are stronger together than we ever could be apart. On quiet evenings, when the family gathered on that same porch where Fletcher and Fiona had sat so many times, they could almost feel their presence. In the creak of the old rocking chair, in the rustle of the wind through the cottonwood trees, in the distant sound of cattle settling for the night. Their ancestors were there, not as ghosts but as a living memory, a reminder of what could be achieved through love and determination. The story ended as all good stories must, with peace and fulfillment and the satisfaction of a life well lived. Fletcher and Fiona Xavier had taken the broken pieces of two solitary lives and forged them into something beautiful and lasting. They had faced challenges and overcome them. They had built a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. And somewhere in the vast Montana sky, among the stars that watched over the ranch they had loved, their spirits remained intertwined, just as they had been in life. Together forever, as they had always meant to be. Two souls who had found each other against the odds, who had chosen love when it would have been easier to remain alone, who had proven that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is let someone in. Their story was over, but their legacy lived on in the land, in the family, and in the hearts of all who heard their tale. It was a story of the Wild West, of cowboys and ranches and the hard work of building a life on the frontier. But more than that, it was a story of love, pure and simple, the kind of love that transforms and endures and becomes the foundation for everything that follows. And so the ranch stood, generation after generation, a monument to Fletcher and Fiona Xavier, and to the simple truth they had discovered together. That we are all stronger when we allow ourselves to be wanted, when we open our hearts to another, when we choose love over fear. Their story had reached its conclusion, but its impact would ripple forward through time, inspiring and guiding all who came after. The end of their story was not sad, despite the inevitable losses and challenges they had faced. It was triumphant. A celebration of what two people could accomplish together, of the family they had built and the love they had shared. From that first meeting in the barn to their final rest on the Montana hillside, Fletcher and Fiona had lived fully and loved completely. And in the end, that was everything.